The world remembers Simon Cowell as the man who could change a person's life with a single sentence, a raised eyebrow, a quiet sigh, a verdict that echoed through stadiums and living rooms across the globe. For more than 2 decades, he was the unshakable force behind the world's biggest talent shows, the sharp mind who shaped dreams, ended delusions, and built an empire as bright as the spotlights that followed him. But what the world rarely sees is the part of his story where no cameras were rolling. The part without applause, without audiences, and without the armor of confidence he wore so convincingly. Behind that image of power lived a man who had been fighting storms long before he ever sat behind a judge's desk. Storms that left scars deeper than any tabloid headline could ever reveal. Before he became a symbol of ruthless honesty, he was a child who never heard the words he needed the most. Before he discovered global stars, he spent years feeling invisible, carrying coffee for people who never bothered to learn his name. The world knows the legend. Few know the loneliness, the humiliation, the heartbreaks, and the tragedies that shaped him. And as the years passed, the cost of that empire grew heavier. A scandal that burned through friendships, a loss that tore at the deepest part of him. A moment on a cold floor in Malibu where he came closer to death than anyone realized. A second fall that brought back the same fear. A face reshaped by pressure until he no longer recognized the reflection looking back at him. A final tragedy, sudden and violent, that shattered a piece of his heart forever. This is not the story of a television giant. This is the story of the boy he once was, the man he became, and the painful rebirth that would change his life at 65. It is a journey carved by failure, fame, loss, and a fragile kind of hope. And now, we step into that journey. Long before Simon Cowell became a titan of entertainment, he was simply a quiet boy growing up inside a house that looked perfect from the outside, yet felt hollow from within. Born in 1959 in London, he grew up in Elstree, a peaceful town that offered neither chaos nor comfort. His family moved through life with grace and status, but tenderness was something rarely spoken, rarely shown. His mother, Julie Brett, had the elegance of a ballet dancer and the presence of a woman who seemed to float above the world. But emotional warmth did not come easily to her. She was beautiful, admired, sophisticated, yet distant, as if her heart lived behind a glass wall that Simon could never reach. His father, Eric Philip Cowell, was the opposite, a disciplined music executive who measured success by achievements, grades, and order. Praise was rare. Approval was a prize almost impossible to earn. Simon once admitted, "My father never told me he was proud of me." That absence, small to some, was a wound that lived in him for years. Every child needs a moment of recognition, a hand on the shoulder, a simple "well done." Simon waited for it, but it never came. School offered no shelter. At Radlett Preparatory School and later Dover College, he did not shine. Not as a scholar, not as an athlete, not even as the class clown. He was the boy on the edge of the room, restless, yet overlooked, present, yet invisible. While other children were encouraged, he was reprimanded. While others were remembered, he faded into the background. By the time he left school, with only a few basic qualifications, Simon carried a quiet shame. In a family where excellence was the currency of love, he felt bankrupt, unworthy, unseen. These early wounds became the blueprint of his ambition. The hunger to be noticed, the fire to prove that the quiet boy no one believed in could one day become someone the world could not ignore. When Simon Cowell stepped into adulthood, the world did not welcome him with open arms. It pushed him to the margins once again, repeating the same cold lesson he had learned as a child. Recognition is never given, only fought for. His father, out of pity rather than pride, secured him a job in the mailroom at EMI Music. It was the lowest rung of an empire built on fame, glamour, and stars who filled arenas with their voices. Every morning, Simon carried coffee to producers who never bothered to look up. He sorted fan mail for artists adored by millions, while no one even remembered his name. In a building overflowing with dreams, he was a shadow, moving quietly between hallways, unseen and unimportant. Years later, he would confess with raw honesty, "I was invisible in a world obsessed with the spotlight." The humiliation built slowly, grain by grain. One day, he could not take it anymore. He quit, walking away from the very job that might have been his only chance. But the world outside was even harsher. Doors closed. Opportunities vanished. Each rejection echoed the same verdict his childhood had whispered: "You are not enough." With nowhere else to go, Simon returned to the same mailroom he had once fled, and this time the humiliation cut deeper. He admitted that during those days he would cry in the bathroom after work quietly so no one could hear. Not because of the job itself, but because he feared his life had already peaked before it had even begun. Yet beneath the shame, something fierce began to take form. Rejection became his teacher. Loneliness became his forge. The boy who had spent a lifetime chasing approval began to realize that no one was coming to save him. If he wanted to rise, he would have to carve his own path through an industry built on giants. This was the moment Simon Cowell started to change. Not outwardly, but deep in the place where ambition is born. By the early 1980s, Simon Cowell had reached a breaking point. Years of feeling unseen, years of swallowing humiliation had pushed him to a silent vow he would no longer live in the shadows of other people's success. With determination stronger than experience, he partnered with E.A. and Burton to launch his own label, Fanfare Records. For the first time in his life, luck seemed to open its hands. A glittering pop hit so macho turned into an unexpected success. Parties, industry events, champagne, laughter, recognition, Simon tasted it all. The boy who once carried coffee through hallways now clinked glasses with the very people who used to ignore him. He felt visible. He felt powerful. He felt like everything he had endured finally meant something. But the entertainment industry is a beast with sharp teeth. Trends shift, markets collapse, and what rises fast often falls even faster. Fanfare Records, once pulsing with new energy, began to crumble. Hit songs stopped streaming in, sales dipped, investors pulled away. By the end of the decade, the label was nothing more than an empty office with silent phones and unpaid bills. Simon was only in his early 30s, yet he faced a downfall more brutal than anything he had imagined. Debts piled up. Friends disappeared. Industry doors that once opened at his touch now slammed shut. There was no applause, no cameras, no glamorous fall from grace, only quiet humiliation. With nowhere else to go, Simon returned to his parents' home, back to the same childhood bedroom that had once echoed with loneliness. Lying awake in that room, surrounded by memories of feeling unwanted and invisible, he felt as though life had circled back to remind him of every scar. Years later, he would describe that period with chilling honesty. "I felt like a ghost haunting my own life." But buried inside that devastation was a spark, small, fragile, but undeniable. Once again, failure became his teacher, and this time it would reshape him into something the world had never seen. When Simon Cowell walked back into the music industry in the early 1990s, he did not return as a visionary or a rising star. He returned as a man marked by failure. Whispers followed him through hallways. People remembered the collapse of Fanfare Records, the debts, the humiliation. At BMG, he was not trusted, he was tolerated. Every meeting felt like an unspoken test, every handshake a quiet doubt. But instead of drowning under the weight of judgment, Simon began to study the business with a sharpness forged from pain. He watched how audiences reacted, what people truly loved, and how music became a product in the hands of those who understood the pulse of the masses. Gone were the illusions of creating timeless art. Instead, he embraced a simple truth that would change his entire path. Critics do not buy records. Ordinary people do. This philosophy led him to sign artists the industry mocked. Pop groups like five vocal duos like Robson and Jerome, and boy bands like Westlife. They were not critical darlings. They were commercial forces. Their songs sold by the millions, filling charts, stadiums, and radio waves. Each success was a victory, but also a reminder of how the industry viewed him. While their sales soared, journalists called him cheap. Insiders sneered behind closed doors. Yet Simon understood something they did not. Fame was not about perfection, it was about connection, and he had mastered how to create it. Every hit song hardened his resolve. Every insult reaffirmed his direction. He was no longer the boy seeking approval. He was the man following results. Still, success did not erase the fear that lived inside him. Nights were filled with worry that everything could collapse again, that one wrong move could send him back to the same small bedroom where he had once tasted defeat. But beneath the fear was momentum, real momentum. And then in 2001, everything changed. The moment that would define a generation launched global stars and transform Simon from a behind-the-scenes businessman into one of the most recognizable faces on the planet. It was time for him to step out of the shadows. When Simon Cowell stepped onto the set of Pop Idol in 2001, he was not expected to become a star. Producers thought he was too blunt, too cold, too sharp around the edges for a medium built on charm. But the audience saw something different. They saw truth. Not the polished, polite truth of television, but the raw, unapologetic truth of a man who refused to pretend. His raised eyebrow became a headline. His silence became a punchline. His harsh verdicts became the heartbeat of the show. Week after week, people tuned in not only to see who could sing, but to see what Simon would say. When American Idol launched in 2002, it was no longer Britain watching, it was the world. And in only a few seasons, Simon Cowell became one of the most recognizable figures on the planet. By the mid-2000s, his influence stretched across continents. The X Factor in the United Kingdom. Got Talent. Expanding worldwide. At his peak, more than 600 million viewers across 100 countries were watching shows stamped with his creative fingerprint. Newspapers called him the most powerful man in television. And for a while, it was true. But power has a price, and Simon paid it quietly. The same sharpness that made him famous also made him despised. He was booed at public events, mocked in tabloids, painted as a villain by people who only saw the cruelty, never the conviction. Behind the scenes, the pressure was brutal, endless auditions, constant travel, live shows that demanded perfection, meetings that stretched long into the night. Every week, every season, every franchise rested on his shoulders. The louder the applause grew, the quieter his personal life became. Friends drifted away, romantic relationships faltered. He admitted in rare moments that even in the middle of filming, surrounded by crowds and cameras, he often felt completely alone. The cruel irony was impossible to ignore. The man who created opportunities for millions struggled to find peace for himself. Still, he pressed forward, unaware that life was preparing a storm fiercer than anything he had faced before. A scandal that would shake his world, losses that would carve deep wounds, and a near-death moment that would force him to confront everything he had ignored. The storm began in 2013, and it arrived without mercy. At the height of his fame, when Simon Cowell stood as the unshakable pillar of global entertainment, the world suddenly turned its gaze on his personal life. The news broke like a wildfire. He was expecting a child with Lauren Silverman, the wife of his close friend Andrew. Overnight, he was no longer the judge. He was the judged. Headlines screamed betrayal. Cameras followed him with the hunger of wolves. And the man who once controlled every narrative found himself powerless in a scandal he could not escape. Simon later admitted, in a rare moment of honesty, "It was not something I am proud of." Those words carried the weight of a man stripped of excuses, standing face to face with the consequences of his own actions. Friendships shattered, trust dissolved. For the first time, Simon longed not for attention, but for invisibility. Yet out of this chaos came an unexpected light. In February 2014, his son Eric was born. When Simon held him for the first time, something shifted. The empire no longer felt important. Ratings no longer felt like oxygen. His world narrowed to the tiny hands gripping his thumb. He confessed later, "My life was no longer about contracts or shows. It was about him." But the universe was not done testing him. In 2015, his mother, Julie Brett, passed away. She had lived a long life, yet her absence struck him like a blow to the chest. She had been the quiet anchor in his turbulent childhood, the silent witness to his rise and collapse. When she died, Simon withdrew from the world. He stopped filming. He stopped smiling. He said softly, "Losing my mom was the hardest thing I have ever gone through." And beneath that, grief lived another wound. His father had passed in 1999 before Simon ever reached global success. Neither parent would witness the man he eventually became. Then came the fall that nearly ended everything. In August 2020, while testing a powerful electric bike at his Malibu home, one wrong movement sent him crashing to the ground. His back shattered in multiple places. 6 hours of surgery, a steel rod inserted into his spine. For days, he hovered near the edge of death. He admitted quietly, "I came within a minute of not making it." The recovery was brutal. Pain became his constant companion. Standing felt impossible. Sleeping felt like torture. And just as he began to heal, fate struck again. In early 2022, another electric bike accident shattered his arm and bruised his face. For a man who once symbolized control, these accidents became cruel reminders that life could take everything in a single second. Yet the deepest wound came not from injury, but from heartbreak. In September 2024, Liam Payne, the boy Simon had once placed in One Direction, died suddenly at only 31. To the world it was a tragedy. To Simon it was like losing a son. He retreated into silence, holding his own son tighter at night, feeling the fragility of life in every breath. These storms reshaped him. They softened him. They humbled him. They forced him to rebuild, not an empire, but himself. By the time Simon Cowell stepped into his mid-60s, the sharp edges that once defined him had softened into something quieter, deeper, and far more human. The man who once commanded global television with an iron presence now moved through life with a gentler rhythm, fully aware that his greatest victories were no longer measured in ratings or headlines. His mornings no longer began with studio calls or executive meetings. Instead, they started with careful stretches and slow Pilates routines prescribed to protect the spine that had nearly cost him his life. Each movement reminded him of the fragility he once ignored. Meals were no longer indulgent celebrations, but carefully planned conversations with nutritionists and doctors. Low sodium to control blood pressure. High fiber to guard against diabetes. Antioxidants to fight fatigue. Every bite felt like a choice for tomorrow. But the greatest challenge was not his back. It was his vision. Years of harsh stage lights and the lingering effects of trauma had dimmed his eyesight. Reading glasses became a constant companion. Dim rooms left him squinting. What frightened him most was the thought of one day being unable to see his son's face clearly. For a man who spent a lifetime searching for recognition, the possibility of losing sight of the one person who loved him unconditionally was unbearable. Yet every evening the weight of these fears melted. His world slowed into soft piano keys, played off rhythm into laughter, echoing through hallways into bedtime, stories read under warm lamps. Eric, now older, had become not just his son, but his anchor. The boy who once saved him now gave him purpose. And behind the gentle domestic life, the empire he built still thrived, Got Talent, and the X Factor continued generating enormous revenue. His fortune, estimated at more than $600 million, sat across mansions in Malibu, London, and New York, and in garages filled with supercars he rarely drove anymore. But Simon no longer clung to wealth. He drafted a will that surprised even those closest to him. Eric would not inherit billions. Instead, Simon planned to direct his fortune into foundations supporting children's healthcare, creative education, and opportunities for young people who began with nothing. "I want Eric to inherit values," he said, "not money." In his lined face, gray hair, and slower steps lived a man who had finally made peace with the truth time had been trying to teach him all along. Empires fade. Fame fades. Even the sharpest judges soften. But legacy. Legacy lives where love is given, where kindness reaches beyond one lifetime, and where a broken man chooses to rise again with a gentler heart.